Chapter 1. Why silence is often the smartest response. Most people believe communication means filling every silence. They think a good conversation requires constant input, immediate answers, and quick comebacks. But the truth is quite different. The most powerful communicators know when to say nothing at all. When someone criticizes you, your body reacts before your mind catches up. Your heart rate increases, your throat tightens. You feel a sudden urge to defend yourself, to explain, to correct the record. This is entirely natural. But acting on that urge rarely serves you well. Consider this scenario. You're in a meeting. A colleague questions your work in front of others. Your instinct screams at you to respond immediately, to justify your choices, to push back. Instead, you take a breath. You pause for 3 seconds. You let the comment land without rushing to fill the space. Those 3 seconds change everything. The tension in the room shifts. Your silence communicates something your words never could. It says, I'm not rattled. I don't need to prove myself right now. I'm listening. This is what we call strategic silence. Strategic means planned or intentional. When you use strategic silence, you're choosing not to react, even though every part of you wants to speak. Here's another phrase worth remembering: holding your ground. To hold your ground means to maintain your position without becoming aggressive or defensive. You can hold your ground through silence just as effectively as through speech. And then there's emotional discipline. Emotional discipline is the ability to feel something strongly without letting that feeling control your behavior. It's not about suppressing your emotions. It's about choosing when and how to express them. Let me give you a real example. A friend of mine works in customer service. One afternoon, a client called her incompetent in front of her manager. She felt humiliated. Her immediate instinct was to defend herself, to list all the times she'd gone above and beyond for this client. But she didn't. She simply said, I hear you. Let me look into this properly and get back to you this afternoon. That's all she said. The client, expecting an argument, had nothing to push against. The manager noted her composure. And later, when she did respond with a clear, factual email, the issue was resolved without drama. Silence gave her time to think, time to separate the emotion from the facts, time to respond rather than react. The difference between reacting and responding is crucial. Reacting is automatic. It's fast. It's driven by emotion. Responding is intentional. It's measured. It's driven by choice. When you react, you hand control to the other person. They've pushed a button, and you've performed exactly as expected. When you respond, you keep that control. You decide what happens next. This doesn't mean you become cold or robotic. It means you give yourself space to feel without immediately acting on those feelings. You might feel angry, but you don't have to sound angry. You might feel hurt, but you don't have to show hurt. Over the next hour, we're going to explore how to build this capacity. How to speak English that is calm, clear, and completely under your control. How to navigate difficult conversations without losing your composure or your credibility. You'll learn specific phrases that buy you time. Sentence structures that protect your boundaries without sounding harsh. Ways to disagree without escalating tension. And most importantly, how to walk away from conversations feeling dignified rather than diminished. Chapter 2. The anatomy of a difficult conversation. Difficult conversations follow predictable patterns. Once you recognize these patterns, they become far less intimidating. You can prepare. You can anticipate what's coming. You can navigate them with confidence. Most difficult conversations begin with a trigger. A trigger is something someone says or does that provokes a strong emotional response in you. It might be a criticism, a dismissal of your ideas, an accusation, or even a tone of voice. The key is recognizing your personal triggers before you're in the heat of the moment. For some people, being interrupted is a trigger. For others, it's being questioned in public. For others still, it's being compared unfavorably to someone else. Once triggered, you enter what psychologists call the fight or flight response. Your body is preparing for danger. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your thinking becomes narrow. You're no longer considering nuance or long-term consequences. You're just trying to survive the moment. This is where most people make mistakes. They speak when they should listen. They escalate when they should de-escalate. They defend when they should clarify. Here's a useful phrase: de-escalate. To de-escalate means to reduce the intensity or severity of a situation. You can de-escalate a conversation by lowering your voice, slowing your speech, or simply acknowledging the other person's feelings without agreeing with them. Imagine this. Your manager tells you your recent project didn't meet expectations. Your immediate thought is, but I worked so hard on that. You feel defensive. You want to list everything you did, every late night, every obstacle you overcame. Instead, you say, I'd like to understand your concerns more fully. Can you help me see where the gap was between what you expected and what I delivered? Notice what you've done. You haven't agreed. You haven't disagreed. You've created space for more information. You've shown you're open to understanding, which is very different from being open to blame. This is called seeking clarity. To seek clarity means to ask questions that help you understand the other person's perspective before you form your response. It's one of the most powerful tools in difficult conversations. Another scenario. A family member says something hurtful at dinner. Maybe they compare you to a sibling. Maybe they question a life choice you've made. Your instinct is to either defend yourself or shut down completely. Here's a middle path. I'm going to think about what you've said. Let's talk about something else for now. This does several things. It acknowledges they've spoken without validating what they said. It sets a boundary without creating conflict. It buys you time to decide how and whether to address this later. This is what we call deferring the conversation. To defer means to postpone or delay. Sometimes the best response is no immediate response at all. You're not avoiding the issue. You're choosing when to address it on your terms, not theirs. Let me introduce another useful concept, the pause before the response. This is a literal physical pause, 3 to 5 seconds of silence before you speak. It feels longer than it is, but it does 3 important things. First, it interrupts your automatic reaction. Second, it signals to the other person that you're taking them seriously. Third, it gives you just enough time to choose your words rather than blurt out the first thing that comes to mind. Try this phrase. I need a moment to think about that. It's simple, it's honest, it's completely reasonable, and yet most people never say it. They feel pressured to respond immediately, as if silence is failure. But silence is not failure. Silence is composure. And composure, in difficult conversations, is what separates people who are respected from people who are merely heard. One more scenario. You're in a job interview and the interviewer asks a question that catches you off guard. Maybe it's about a gap in your CV. Maybe it's a challenge to something you've claimed. You feel your confidence wobble. You could scramble for an answer and sound uncertain. Or you could say, that's an important question. Let me give you a considered answer. Then you take a breath. You organize your thoughts, and you respond with clarity. This is buying yourself time, and it's a skill you'll use constantly once you realize how effective it is. English gives you dozens of ways to create this pause without sounding evasive. Chapter 3. Building your verbal buffer zone. Now we move from understanding difficult conversations to actively managing them. This requires what I call a verbal buffer zone. A buffer zone is a protective space. In conversation, it's the language you use to create distance between someone else's emotion and your reaction. Think of it like this. Someone throws a comment at you. Without a buffer zone, that comment hits you directly. You feel it immediately. You react from that feeling. With a buffer zone, the comment arrives, but you've created a small gap between the comment and your response. That gap is where your power lives. Let's build this buffer zone phrase by phrase. First, acknowledgement without agreement. This is critical. You can acknowledge what someone has said without validating it or accepting it as truth. Here are 5 ways to do this. I understand you see it that way. I hear what you're saying. I can see this matters to you. That's your perspective. I appreciate you sharing that. Notice something. None of these sentences say you're right or I agree. They simply confirm that you've received the message. This is called neutral acknowledgement. Neutral means not taking sides. You're not endorsing their view, but you're not dismissing them either. This matters because most arguments escalate when people feel unheard. By acknowledging them, you often reduce their need to push harder. You've given them something without giving away your position. Now let's add a second layer. Clarifying questions. These are questions that sound cooperative but actually protect you. They force the other person to be more specific, which often reveals whether their complaint is reasonable or not. Try these. Can you help me understand what specifically concerned you? What would meeting your expectations look like? Which part exactly didn't work for you? What would you like to see happen now? These questions do something clever. They shift the burden back to the speaker. Now they have to explain themselves more fully. Often, when people are forced to be specific, they realize their criticism was vague or unfair. Other times, you gain genuinely useful information that helps you respond more effectively. Here's a phrase to remember. Burden of proof. The burden of proof means the responsibility to demonstrate that something is true. When someone makes a claim about you, you don't have to disprove it. They have to prove it. Clarifying questions put that burden back where it belongs. Let's imagine a workplace scenario. Your colleague says, "You never contribute in meetings." That's a sweeping statement. It's probably not true. But if you say, "Yes, I do," you sound defensive and you've started an argument you can't win. Instead, can you give me an example of a recent meeting where you felt I should have contributed more? Now they have to back up their claim. Either they can't, which weakens their position, or they can, which gives you specific information to address. This is strategic questioning. Strategic questioning means using questions not just to gather information, but to protect yourself and redirect the conversation. Here's another protective phrase. "Let me make sure I've understood you correctly." Then you repeat back what they said in your own words. This does two things. It confirms you're listening, and it forces them to hear their own point, sometimes revealing how unreasonable it was. For example, "Let me make sure I've understood you correctly. You're saying that because I didn't respond to your email within 2 hours, I'm not taking the project seriously. Is that right?" When they hear it said back, they often soften. "Well, not exactly." And suddenly you're having a more reasonable conversation. Now let's talk about boundary statements. A boundary statement is a sentence that clearly defines what you will or won't do without apology or aggression. It's calm, it's firm, it's final. Examples. "I'm not available to discuss this right now, but I'm happy to talk tomorrow." "I don't discuss my personal life at work. I'm not going to continue this conversation if voices are raised. That's not something I'm willing to do." Notice the structure. Simple, direct, no hedging. No, maybe, or I think, or sorry, but these sentences are complete. They don't invite negotiation. Many people struggle with boundary statements because they fear sounding rude. But there's a difference between being rude and being clear. Rudeness is hostile. Clarity is respectful. You can be both kind and firm. One more tool for your buffer zone. Deferral phrases. These buy you time without refusing engagement. "I need some time to think this through properly. Let me check my notes and get back to you. I want to give you a proper answer, so let me reflect on this. I'll need to review the details before I can respond." These phrases are gold. They acknowledge the conversation without requiring you to resolve it immediately. They show you're taking the matter seriously, which often satisfies the other person. And they give you time to craft a response when you're calm and clear-headed. Chapter 4. When to speak and when to walk away. One of the hardest skills to learn is knowing when to engage and when to disengage. Not every difficult conversation deserves your energy. Not every criticism deserves a response. Not every conflict deserves resolution. Let me be clear. Walking away is not weakness. Walking away is sometimes the strongest thing you can do. But you need to know how to do it with dignity. First, let's establish when engagement is worthwhile. A conversation is worth having when the other person is acting in good faith. Good faith means they're genuinely trying to communicate, to understand, or to resolve something. They might be upset, but they're not trying to harm you. Signs of good faith include they're willing to listen to your perspective. They can admit when they're wrong or unclear. They focus on the issue rather than attacking you personally, and they're willing to find a solution. If these things are present, engage. Use everything we've discussed. Ask clarifying questions. Acknowledge their feelings. Set boundaries where needed. Work toward understanding. But if these things are absent, you need a different approach. Some conversations are not about resolution. They're about control, domination, or simply venting anger. These conversations are bad faith interactions. Signs of bad faith include they refuse to let you speak. They twist your words. They bring up past issues unrelated to the current topic. They attack your character rather than discussing behavior. And they escalate no matter how calmly you respond. In bad faith situations, your goal is not to win. Your goal is to exit with dignity. To exit with dignity means to leave the conversation without being drawn into their chaos and without diminishing yourself. Here's how. First, name what's happening, calmly, factually. I've noticed that every time I try to speak, I'm interrupted. I don't think we can have a productive conversation right now. This feels like it's become personal rather than about the actual issue. I'm going to step away. I'm willing to discuss this, but not when voices are raised. Notice you're not attacking them. You're simply stating an observable fact about the conversation itself. This is called meta-communication. Meta-communication means talking about the way you're talking. It's a powerful tool because it shifts the focus from the content of the argument to the quality of the interaction. Second, state your boundary clearly. I'm going to end this conversation now. I'm not continuing this discussion today. I need to leave. Short sentences. No justification. No apology. You don't need to explain why you're protecting yourself. Third, and this is crucial, follow through. If you say you're leaving, leave. Don't let them pull you back in with, so you're just going to run away. Or typical, you can't handle a real conversation. These are bait statements. Bait statements are designed to provoke you into re-engaging. They attack your character to trigger a defensive response. Don't take the bait. If they bait you, you can simply repeat your boundary. As I said, I'm ending this conversation now. Then leave. You might worry this seems cold or unfair, but ask yourself, what's unfair about refusing to participate in a conversation where you're not being treated with respect? What's cold about protecting your own well-being? Let me tell you about something called the 5-minute rule. If a conversation has been circular, unproductive, or hostile for more than 5 minutes, it's unlikely to improve. People don't suddenly become reasonable when they're already escalated. They need time to cool down. So do you. Apply the 5-minute rule. If you're going in circles, if the same accusations keep coming up, if nothing you say makes any difference, that's your signal to disengage. Here are some exit phrases that maintain your dignity. I think we both need some space right now. Let's revisit this later. I don't think this conversation is helping either of us. I'm going to step away. I care about resolving this, but not like this. Let's talk when we're both calmer. I'm choosing to end this here. Each of these phrases does something important. It acknowledges the issue exists without staying in a toxic dynamic. It leaves the door open for future conversation, if appropriate, and it firmly establishes your right to protect yourself. Now, a question you might be thinking. What if walking away has consequences? What if it's your boss, or a family member, or someone you can't easily avoid? Walking away doesn't mean you never address the issue. It means you address it when you can do so effectively. You might walk away from a heated conversation with your boss, then return the next day with a calm email outlining your perspective. You might leave a difficult family dinner, then call that relative later when you're both calm. The key is this: you're choosing when and how to engage. You're not letting their urgency or anger dictate your response. One final point: sometimes walking away is permanent. Some relationships, some jobs, some dynamics are not fixable. If you've tried good faith engagement multiple times and it never works, you might need to accept that continued interaction is harmful. This is called strategic withdrawal. Strategic withdrawal means deliberately distancing yourself from a person or situation that consistently damages your well-being. It's not giving up. It's choosing yourself. Reflection. Checkpoint. Before we continue, pause for a moment. Think about a recent difficult conversation you've had. Can you identify whether the other person was acting in good faith or bad faith? How might you have responded differently using the tools we've just discussed? You don't need to answer aloud. Just sit with the question. Chapter 5. The language of disagreement without drama. Disagreeing with someone is not inherently aggressive. But the way most people disagree creates unnecessary tension. They use language that sounds combative even when they don't intend to. Learning to disagree gracefully is one of the most valuable communication skills you can develop. The problem with most disagreements is that they begin with negation. No, that's wrong. I don't agree. That's not how it works. These openings immediately put the other person on the defensive. Even if your point is valid, you've started a fight. Instead, try yes and no phrasing. This means you start by acknowledging something true or reasonable in what they've said, then introduce your different perspective. Examples. I see why you'd think that, and I've looked at it from another angle. That's one way to approach it. I've had success with a different method. I understand your concern. My experience has been slightly different. There's truth in that. I'd add that we also need to consider. Notice the structure. You're not saying you're wrong. You're saying, here's another view. This keeps the conversation collaborative rather than adversarial. It shows you're both trying to reach the best answer, not trying to prove each other wrong. Here's a phrase worth learning: collaborative framing. Collaborative framing means presenting disagreement as a shared problem-solving exercise rather than a conflict. Instead of you versus me, it becomes us versus the problem. Let's apply this. You're in a planning meeting. Someone suggests a timeline you know is unrealistic. If you say that won't work, you sound negative and unhelpful. Instead, I share the goal of moving quickly. I'm concerned about the resource constraints we're facing. Could we look at what would need to happen to make that timeline achievable? What have you done? You've aligned yourself with their goal. You've identified a real constraint without blaming anyone, and you've invited problem solving rather than argument. This is called constructive disagreement. Constructive disagreement means you're not just pointing out what's wrong, you're contributing to finding what's right. Now let's talk about softening language. Softening language doesn't mean being weak. It means choosing words that are firm but not harsh. This is especially important in written communication, where tone is easy to misinterpret. Compare these pairs. You're wrong about this versus I have a different understanding. That's a terrible idea versus I have concerns about that approach. You didn't do this properly versus I noticed some gaps we should address. The second version in each pair is just as clear, but it's far less likely to provoke defensiveness. You're focusing on the issue, not the person. You're inviting discussion, not issuing judgment. But here's the important part. Softening language should never compromise clarity. You're not being vague. You're being diplomatic. For instance, if someone has genuinely made an error that affects you, you can be direct without being harsh. I need to flag an issue. The report had incorrect figures, which has created some confusion with the client. Can we make sure the next version is double-checked? Clear, specific, no personal attack, no drama. Let's discuss disagreeing up. Disagreeing up means contradicting someone who has more authority than you, like a manager or senior colleague. This requires extra care, but it's absolutely possible. The formula is this: respect their position, present your concern clearly, invite their input. Example: I appreciate the direction you've set. I want to raise a potential issue I've noticed. I'm concerned that if we proceed this way, we might face X problem. Have you considered this angle? You've shown respect. You've been direct about your concern. You've framed it as a question rather than a challenge. This makes it much easier for them to engage with your point without feeling undermined. Here's another scenario. A senior colleague dismisses your idea in a group setting. You could argue back and create tension, or you could use strategic reframing. I think we might be saying similar things in different ways. When I suggested X, I was trying to address Y. It sounds like you're focused on Z. Could there be a way to do both? You've reframed the disagreement as a misunderstanding or a difference in priorities, not a fundamental conflict. This often allows both of you to save face and move forward. One more tool, the broken record technique. This is when you calmly repeat your position without escalation, no matter how the other person responds. It's particularly useful when someone is trying to wear you down. Them. But everyone else is fine with staying late. You. I understand that. I'm not available this evening. Them. It's just this once. It's really important. You. I hear you. I'm still not available. Them. I thought you were a team player. You. I am, and I'm not available this evening. Simple. Calm. Consistent. You're not arguing. You're not justifying. You're just restating your boundary. Eventually, they realize they're not going to change your mind. This technique works because it removes the emotional fuel from the conversation. There's nothing to argue against. You're not being hostile, so they can't accuse you of being difficult. You're just being clear. Chapter 6. Navigating criticism without losing your center. Criticism is inevitable. You will be criticized. Sometimes it will be fair. Sometimes it will be unfair. Sometimes it will be delivered kindly. Often it will not. Your ability to receive criticism with composure will determine much of your professional and personal success. Here's the truth that no one tells you. Most criticism says more about the critic than it does about you. People criticize from their own values, their own insecurities, their own expectations. Understanding this doesn't make criticism pleasant, but it does make it less personal. Let's start with the distinction between constructive criticism and destructive criticism. Constructive criticism aims to help you improve. It's specific. It focuses on behavior or output, not character. It usually includes a path forward. Example of constructive criticism. Your presentation had good content, but the slides were hard to read. Larger font and fewer bullet points would help. That's useful. You can act on it. Destructive criticism aims to hurt or diminish you. It's vague. It attacks who you are, not what you did. It offers no solution. Example of destructive criticism. You're just not good at this. I don't know why you even try. That's not feedback. That's cruelty. Your response to these two types must be different. For constructive criticism, even when it stings, the framework is simple. Listen, clarify, acknowledge, decide. Listen without interrupting. This is harder than it sounds. You'll want to defend yourself immediately. Resist. Let them finish. Show you're listening by maintaining eye contact and not fidgeting. Clarify what you're hearing. So you're saying the main issue was X and you think Y would improve it? Acknowledge their perspective. I appreciate you taking the time to give me specific feedback. Decide what to do with it. Not all criticism is correct, even when it's constructive. Acknowledge it, consider it, then decide. You might say, I'm going to think about how to implement this, or I see your point, though I approached it that way because of Z reason. The key is staying open without being passive. You're receiving the criticism, not surrendering to it. Now, destructive criticism. Here, your goal is not to improve because there's nothing useful to extract. Your goal is to protect your sense of self. First, recognize it for what it is. Tell yourself, this is destructive. This is not about me improving. This is about them. Second, don't defend. When criticism is character-based rather than behavior-based, defending yourself rarely helps. They're not trying to be convinced. They're trying to wound. Instead, use one of these responses. I hear that's how you see me. We clearly have very different perspectives. I'm not going to engage with character assessments. Or simply, okay. That last one is remarkably powerful. Okay, it's not agreement. It's acknowledgement that they've spoken. Then you move on. You don't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Let me tell you about the gray rock method. This comes from psychology. When dealing with someone who thrives on provoking emotional reactions, you become like a gray rock, boring, unresponsive, not hostile, just uninteresting. They make a cutting remark. You respond with minimal emotion, okay, or I see, or if you say so. You give them nothing to work with. Eventually, they lose interest because they're not getting the drama they want. Now, what about criticism from people whose opinion you value? A mentor, a close friend, a family member? This is harder because it matters more. Even then, you can receive it without losing your center. Your center is your sense of who you are, independent of others' judgments. It's your core confidence. It's what allows you to consider criticism without being devastated by it. To maintain your center during difficult feedback, try this internal script. This person cares about me and wants me to succeed. I'm going to listen to what they're saying. I'm going to feel whatever I feel about it. And then I'm going to decide what's true and what isn't. You can feel hurt and still evaluate the feedback objectively. You can feel defensive and still ask clarifying questions. Emotions are allowed. Letting them control your response is optional. Here's a phrase that helps. There may be truth in this, and I am not defined by this. Both things can be true. Someone can point out a genuine flaw, and you can still be a person of value. Those things coexist. Let's talk about public criticism. Being criticized in front of others is particularly painful because it carries the risk of public humiliation. Your instinct will be to correct the record immediately. Sometimes that's right. Often it's not. If someone criticizes you in a meeting, you have options. You can address it immediately. I'd be happy to discuss this, though I see it differently. You can defer it. Let's talk about this afterward. Or you can let it stand and address it privately later. The right choice depends on context. If the criticism is factually wrong and letting it stand would harm you professionally, address it. If it's a matter of opinion or style, deferring might be wiser. What you must never do is match their aggression. If they're hostile in public and you become hostile back, everyone loses respect for both of you. Stay calm. State your point briefly if you must. Then move on. After the meeting, you can address it privately. I noticed you had concerns about my approach in the meeting. I'd like to understand your perspective better. This does two things. It shows you're professional enough to seek resolution, and it creates a space where they might realize they were too harsh and soften. One final tool, the 24-hour rule. When you receive criticism that truly rattles you, don't respond immediately. Give yourself 24 hours. Let the emotional charge settle. Then decide what, if anything, needs to be said. In those 24 hours, you might realize the criticism was fair and you need to change something. Or you might realize it was unfair and you need to set a boundary. Or you might realize it doesn't matter and you can simply let it go. Reflection checkpoint. Think of a recent piece of criticism you received. Was it constructive or destructive? How did you respond? If you could handle it again, what would you do differently? Chapter 7. Apologies, accountability, and when to admit you're wrong. Knowing when to apologize is as important as knowing when to stand firm. Many people over-apologize, saying sorry for things that aren't their fault or aren't even problems. Others refuse to apologize even when they're clearly wrong because they see it as weakness. Both approaches damage relationships. Let's start with what an apology is not. An apology is not a negotiation. It's not a defense. It's not an excuse. A real apology is a clean acknowledgement that you did something that caused harm or inconvenience. and you take responsibility for it. Here's the structure of a good apology. Acknowledge what you did, express understanding of the impact, take responsibility, state what you'll do differently. Example, I'm sorry I missed the deadline. I know that created extra work for you and put the project behind schedule. That was my responsibility. Going forward, I'll build in buffer time and communicate earlier if I see a problem. Notice what's not there. No but, no if, no you probably overreacted. Just acknowledgement, ownership, and action. Now compare that to a bad apology. I'm sorry if you were upset that I missed the deadline, but I had a lot going on and you didn't really tell me how important it was. That's not an apology. That's blame shifting wrapped in apologetic language. The word if in an apology is almost always a problem. I'm sorry if I hurt you implies you might not have hurt them, or their hurt might not be valid. Just say, I'm sorry I hurt you. The word but is similarly destructive. Anything before but gets erased. I'm sorry, but you also stops being an apology and becomes a counter-accusation. Let's discuss when an apology is necessary. You should apologize when you've made a genuine mistake, when you've failed to meet a reasonable expectation, when you've caused someone legitimate harm or inconvenience, or when you've behaved in a way that conflicts with your own values. You should not apologize when you've done nothing wrong, when you're being blamed for someone else's unreasonable expectations, when saying sorry would imply you accept an accusation that's false, or when someone is trying to manipulate you into feeling guilty. This is called discernment. Discernment means the ability to judge what is appropriate or not appropriate. Many people lack discernment around apologies. They say sorry reflexively, even when they've done nothing that warrants it. If you're British, you might recognize this tendency. Sorry, could you just move your bag? When someone's bag is blocking your path, you haven't done anything wrong. They have, but you apologize anyway. In casual social contexts, this is harmless. In professional or difficult interpersonal contexts, it can be damaging. It trains people to see you as someone who accepts blame easily. If you find yourself over-apologizing, try replacing sorry with other phrases. Instead of sorry to bother you, say, thanks for your time. Instead of sorry, I don't understand, say, could you clarify that for me? Instead of sorry, I need to leave, say, I need to leave now. These rephrasings maintain politeness without unnecessary self-diminishment. Now the other side, what if you're someone who struggles to apologize even when you should? This usually comes from fear. Fear that apologizing means you're admitting you're a bad person. Fear that it gives the other person power over you. Fear that they'll use your apology against you. Here's the reframe. Apologizing when you're genuinely wrong is a sign of strength, not weakness. It shows you're secure enough to own your mistakes. It demonstrates integrity, and paradoxically, it often earns more respect than stubbornly refusing to admit fault. Let me give you a phrase, accountable but not diminished. You can take full responsibility for a mistake without it defining your worth. The mistake is one thing you did, not the totality of who you are. Consider this scenario. You snapped at a colleague because you were stressed. It wasn't justified. They didn't deserve it. You could ignore it and hope they forget. Or you could say, I want to apologize for how I spoke to you earlier. You didn't deserve that. I was stressed, but that's not an excuse. I should have been more professional. That's a complete apology. It's clear. It's owned, and it likely repairs the relationship far more effectively than avoidance would. Here's something subtle but important. Sometimes people want an apology not because they need acknowledgement of harm, but because they want you to submit. They want power over you. In these cases, apologizing might not resolve anything. It might actually make things worse. How do you tell the difference? Ask yourself, is this person genuinely hurt by something I did, or are they trying to control me? If you apologize, will it lead to repair and moving forward, or will it lead to them using it as ammunition later? If someone repeatedly demands apologies for things that aren't your fault, or if they bring up past apologies to shame you, you're not dealing with someone who wants reconciliation. You're dealing with someone who wants dominance. In those situations, you need to set a boundary instead of apologizing. I'm not going to apologize for that. I believe my response was reasonable. This brings us to defensive apologies. These are apologies people make not because they believe they're wrong, but because they want to end conflict. Fine, I'm sorry, can we just move on? These apologies do more harm than good. They breed resentment in you because you've betrayed your own sense of truth. They teach the other person that pressure works, And they don't actually resolve anything because both of you know the apology was hollow. If you don't believe you should apologize, don't. You can still work toward resolution without apologizing. I hear that you're upset. I see this situation differently than you do. How can we move forward? That's honest. It acknowledges their feelings without accepting false blame. It keeps the door open to resolution without compromising your integrity. Let's talk about repair versus apology. Sometimes what's needed isn't an apology but a repair. Repair means taking action to fix the impact of what happened. For example, if you forgot to send an important document, you could say sorry. But what really matters is sending the document and making sure it doesn't happen again. The action is the repair. The apology is secondary. In some cultures, over-apologizing is seen as insincere. Action speaks louder than words. If this resonates with you, focus less on crafting the perfect apology and more on demonstrating through behavior that you've heard the feedback and you're adjusting. Here's a useful phrase: acknowledge and adjust. Acknowledge what went wrong. Adjust your behavior. That's often more powerful than words alone. One more scenario. You apologize sincerely and the other person refuses to accept it. They keep bringing it up. They hold it over your head. What then? You've done what you can. You've taken responsibility. Their ongoing resentment is now their choice, not your responsibility. You can say calmly, I've apologized and I've explained what I'll do differently. I can't make you forgive me, but I also can't keep apologizing indefinitely. That's a boundary. You've done your part. If they choose not to move forward, that's on them. A final thought on accountability. Being accountable means acknowledging your impact, even when your intent was good. Intent matters, but it doesn't erase impact. If you hurt someone accidentally, the hurt still exists. A good apology acknowledges that. I didn't mean to hurt you, and I understand that I did. I'm sorry. Notice the structure. You're not saying I didn't mean to, so it doesn't count. You're saying, my intent was good, but the impact was real, and I take responsibility for the impact. This is emotional maturity. It's rare, it's powerful, and it's one of the clearest markers of someone who has done the work to communicate with integrity. Chapter 8. Holding Boundaries. Without guilt, boundaries are limits you set to protect your well-being, your time, your energy, and your values. And yet, for many people, setting boundaries feels almost impossible. They fear being seen as difficult, selfish, or unkind. They fear rejection or conflict. So they say yes when they mean no. They accommodate when they should decline. They give when they have nothing left. This pattern doesn't make you a good person. It makes you an exhausted one. Let's start with the truth. Setting boundaries is not unkind. It's honest. That's the toolkit in action. Simple, calm, effective. Let's address one more thing. What about cultural differences? Communication norms vary widely across cultures. Directness that's valued in one context might be considered rude in another. Silence that's respectful in one culture might be seen as passive in another. These tools are adaptable. The core principles, being clear, staying calm, protecting yourself, remain the same. But the specific phrasing can shift. In a more indirect culture, you might soften your language more. In a more hierarchical culture, you might show more deference while still holding your boundary. The key is intention. Are you communicating with respect and clarity? Are you protecting your well-being without harming others? If yes, you can adjust the expression while keeping the core intact. Finally, remember this. Calm communication is not about being liked. It's about being respected. It's about being clear. It's about being true to yourself while treating others with dignity. Some people will like you more when you set boundaries. They'll respect your clarity and your strength. Others will like you less because you're no longer as convenient. That's information. It tells you who values you as a person versus who values what they can get from you. Your job is not to make everyone happy. Your job is to communicate with integrity, handle difficulty with composure, and protect your peace. These tools help you do exactly that. Closing. We've spent this hour exploring the art of calm, clear communication in difficult moments. You've learned how silence can be more powerful than speech, how to create a buffer zone between someone's words and your reaction, how to disagree without creating unnecessary drama, how to receive criticism without losing yourself, how to apologize with integrity and hold boundaries without guilt. You've learned that the conversation in your head shapes the conversation in the room. And you've been given a practical toolkit, 10 specific strategies you can use starting today. Here's what I want you to understand as we close. This is a practice, not a destination. You won't master everything immediately. You'll stumble. You'll react when you meant to respond. You'll set a boundary and then feel terrible about it. You'll replay conversations and wish you'd said something differently. All of that is normal. All of that is part of the process. What matters is that you keep practicing. Each time you use one of these tools, even imperfectly, you're building a new pattern. You're teaching yourself and others how you expect to be treated. Over time, difficult conversations become less frightening, not because they stop being difficult, but because you trust yourself to handle them. You know you won't fall apart. You know you won't say things you'll regret. You know you can protect yourself and maintain your dignity. That confidence is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to prove anything. It's simply there, steady and reliable when you need it. So here's your action plan. 3 practical steps you can take starting today. Step 1. Identify your next boundary conversation. Think of one situation, current or recurring, where you need to set or reinforce a boundary. Maybe it's with a colleague who interrupts you. Maybe it's with a friend who asks for too much. Maybe it's with yourself, learning to say no to commitments you don't have capacity for. Pick one. Write down what you'll say. Keep it simple. Use the language from Tool 4. Practice saying it aloud until it feels natural. Step 2. Practice the pause. For the next week, deliberately pause before responding in any conversation that has even mild tension. 3 seconds. Just 3. Notice what happens. Notice how it feels. Notice whether it changes what you say. This single practice will transform your communication more than any other. Step 3. Audit your apologies. Pay attention to how often you say sorry and for what. Keep a mental or actual note. At the end of each day, ask yourself, which of those apologies were necessary and which were just habit? Start replacing unnecessary sorries with other phrases. Thank you instead of sorry. Statements instead of apologies. Watch how this shifts the way people interact with you. Those 3 steps are enough. Don't try to implement everything at once. Start there. Build from there. Trust the process. Before we finish, I want to leave you with this thought. The ability to stay calm and clear when others are not is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. It serves you in every area of life. At work, in relationships, with family, in moments of crisis. It's not about being cold. It's not about being unfeeling. It's about having enough internal stability that you can feel deeply without being controlled by those feelings. It's about being present and aware, even when things are hard. You have that capacity. You've always had it. These tools simply help you access it more consistently. So the next time you face a difficult conversation, remember, you don't have to react. You don't have to defend. You don't have to win. You just have to be clear, be calm, and be true to yourself. That's enough. That's always been enough. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope you carry these tools with you. I hope you use them. And I hope you find, as I have, that calm communication isn't just about managing conflict. It's about reclaiming your peace and your power, one conversation at a time. Go forward with confidence. You've got this.